Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston and today I'm taking a look at the rise of zero-click search, a phenomenon accelerated by the appearance of AI-powered answer engines, especially Google's introduction of AI overviews. This is a companion episode to the zero-click content shift, a 10,000 word report that you can download for free at voices.media/zero-click. Before we get into it, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Woodwing, without whose support we could not have undertaken this work. For more than 25 years, Woodwing has helped publishing teams create, manage and deliver content across a host of digital channels, facilitating multi-channel production and digital asset management, crucial in combating the threat of zero-click search. For more information on Woodwing's publishing solutions, go to woodwing.com. As we began wrapping up this episode, Google made the biggest change to its search box in about a quarter of a century. The search box is getting bigger so that people can ask longer questions. And in searches that deliver AI overviews, people can ask follow-up questions in AI mode. When this news broke, the Rebooting's Brian Morrissey wrote, Google rolled out a new AI search experience that will shift its approach to an agentic experience that will further erode traffic to publishers. The open web has gone from getting its affairs in order to calling for a priest. No one I spoke to throughout our zero-click research, not a lot that I read, supported the notion that Google Zero is imminent. But maybe it just crept a little bit closer. Google's latest moves don't change the big takeaways from this report. The rise of zero-click search and the threat of Google Zero have to be seen as a driver for change. The era of traffic maxing in pursuit of programmatic revenue is collapsing, and publishers need to lessen their dependence on Google's referral traffic. They need to trade volume for value and drive-by clicks for engagement and loyalty. In the long term, the zero-click content shift might just be the catalyst for making your publishing business more self-reliant, more sustainable, and more commercially resilient. But before we get to some strategies for fixing publishing's addiction to clicks, how did we get where we are? From the moment the World Wide Web went mainstream, search engines have been sending curious web users to third-party websites for answers to their questions. Google, the £800 gorilla of the search world, has been redirecting people to publishers' web properties for almost 30 years. But a couple of years ago, rather than guiding people elsewhere, AI-powered chatbots started answering search queries directly. Most significant from the perspective of referral traffic, Google began answering queries at the top of its own search result pages. Using its Gemini LLM, the search jack began synthesizing content from around the web to create AI overviews, neat little summaries that cut out the searcher's need to click. Publishers immediately saw a zero-click future in which the decades-old deal of exchanging content for clicks got blown up. Google Zero, the absolute absence of referral traffic, quickly became an industry bogeyman. There's no doubt that the answer engine era has arrived, and the rise of zero-click search has brought the potential to completely transform how content is discovered, consumed, and monetised. But does zero-click search as it exists today really pose an existential threat to the publishing business? If you only relied on the headlines from the middle of 2025, you could be forgiven for thinking that it was game over as far as search referrals were concerned. The general vibe was existential crisis, with catastrophic traffic declines of 50% or more regularly reported. But if there's one thing the publishing industry does even better than pivot, it's panic. While acknowledging the very real pain felt by some publishers, analysts are increasingly arguing that broader referral data tells a more nuanced story than the headlines would suggest. Have a listen to Barry Adams, the SEO consultant and advisory partner to FT Strategies.
The context in which this panic exists is that publishers and websites in general, I suppose, have sort of been used to an endless fire hose of traffic. Google has kept on growing, and Google has kept sending more and more clicks to the web year after year after year, which meant that as a publisher or as any sort of website, if you did anything even half decently, you could still get growth from Google because it was more or less Google's growth you were relying on rather than your own growth. That growth curve has flatlined and maybe even slightly decreasing. Google is sending either the same traffic to the web or slightly less traffic, but we're only talking about slightly less. We're not talking about huge drops of traffic losses. Part of that is because of Google's AI overviews. Part of it is also because of a fragmented user experience where people don't necessarily go directly to the web anymore. They go to different platforms, social media, AI chatbots, direct recommendations, you name it. And that is now probably one of the first times where we see industry-wide downward trends in terms of traffic acquisition and audience growth, or audience decline in this case. And for some publishers, that immediately leads to existential panic.
Audience Growth Consultant Clara Soteras recently completed a research study looking at the impact of AI overviews in Spanish media.
Google Zero is not the new reality, but obviously we need to take into account that the landscape is changing. Clicks are dropping, and we need to understand that we need to work in other KPIs, in other ways to catch the audience and to attract new users.
John Fong, Managing Director for Woodwing in Asia Pacific, doesn't expect Google referrals to disappear either, but he does see a decline.
The click-through rate has reduced, but doesn't mean the click-through rate will go to zero. I don't think you will ever go to zero. The data, if you look at it, is also a little bit blown out of proportion, right? Traditional organic search is still the highest results in there, but there is a decline, right? Nevertheless, especially when you look at APAC region, where the internet consumption is dominated by mobile phones. Now, there is this part that we need to counter for. As a content producer or publisher, you need to be aware how to be on top of this game, how to be able to surface your content or your citations to be on those agentic LLM.
We'll come back to LLMs and how to stay on top of your game in a bit. But first, Barry puts Google's position in the referral traffic space into perspective.
Google is still the single largest driver of traffic to the web, and there is no platform rising to take its place. There is no change in user behavior in a meaningful way. At the last count, Google generated more than 5 trillion searches a year. 5 trillion, that's a number we can't wrap our heads around. And even with the lowest estimates of click-through rate on those searches, we're talking about those 5 trillion searches sending probably about 1 trillion clicks to the web. A tiny percentage of clicks from those 1 trillion is still worth optimizing for. What has changed is that it's now become harder to get that traffic. Search used to be basically an endless growth channel where you get a click, your competitor gets a click, everybody gets a click, very Oprah Winfrey-like. Whereas now it's a zero-sum channel. You get a click, your competitor does not. And that's the new reality we have to get used to, which means we have to work harder at it.
The answer engines might also be making life more difficult for publishers in search.
This is an evolution where the search engine that used to become a gateway for you to get information, it becomes a destination. There's a lot of debate whether this zero click will be a doomsday or it's going to be affecting the SEO. There is a diversification in terms of the traffic, obviously. The SEO is still there. The rankings are still there. The search results are still there. It's just that a lot of attention, a lot of traffic now also goes into the top half where the agentic LLM is giving you the answer.
John turns to one of his hobbies to illustrate how he thinks publishers should respond.
There is a structural change. Obviously, the people need to do different things. In Malaysia lately, we have this upsurge of people adopting and playing pickleball, but people still go to play tennis, right? A lot of tennis court has been converted to pickleball courts, right? But that doesn't mean that tennis is dead. It's just that people have more options now. And it's very important to understand those options and understand the segment that you're serving to be able to leverage on the benefits out of it. For most of the publishers I speak to, most of the traffic still comes from the click-through. But there is a growing segment coming through, right, from the agentic and AI. So this is where being a publisher, not only that you need to be aware of it, but you need to be on top of it, right? And say, okay, how do we counter? How do we get ourselves in that part? How do we get our brand relevant to the pickleball segment?
Barry's advice is that rather than panic at the changes taking place in the search landscape, publishers should take the chance to focus on the value they are delivering to their audiences.
I think publishers need to seize this moment as an opportunity to refocus themselves, to re-evaluate what their purpose is, what their value as a publisher actually is, and more importantly, understand what their audience wants from them. And I think that's something a lot of publishers have lost contact with. They don't talk to their audience, they don't talk to their readers. They think advertisers are their customers, which I think is the most critical strategic mistake a publisher can make, to think that their advertisers are actually the customers. No, they're not. Your audience is your customers, and you need to do whatever you need to do to keep that audience locked in your own ecosystem. And the advertisers help make you money, absolutely, but they're not your customers. Don't chase after clicks, chase after your audience, chase after your readers, deliver value for them, and it might not give you more traffic in the short term, but it will guarantee your survival and your prosperity even in the long term. If you look at the big news brands out there and the ones that are actually doing quite well, even the ones who, for example, went behind hard paywalls, they seem to be doing all right because they never lost sight of what their purpose is for their audience. And they saw Google as a channel, absolutely, and an important and powerful channel, but just as a means to an end, the end being making sure that their output gets the credit that it deserves, rather than putting the algorithm first. They put the audience first and then try to see how they can maximize its visibility in the algorithm.
Including that audience piece, John sees a consensus building around a 3-pillar framework for countering the zero-click threat.
There seems to have a consensus in terms of strategy. This is the 3 main pillars they're looking at, right? The first one being obviously the answer engine optimization, where you need to understand how these machines are taking your content. And then, you have to speak the same language. So making sure your tech stack have the same language with the machine, so they could easily pick it up. And secondly, I think this is something that some publishers taking things for granted. They rely too much on the search engine sometimes. And this is where I think as a publisher or a content producer, you need to own your audience. By owning the audience, you really have the first hand and a direct relationship with the audience. And that's really, really important. So whatever comes next after this AI or AEO or whatever, you don't have to worry because you actually knows your audience, you know what they want, and you can serve them directly. And thirdly, this is something I think the AI at this point in time is not capable of, right? As we all heard, AI can hallucinate, they can be wrong. I mean, every single AI engine that you go in, they will tell you, there will be a caution to tell you that, hey, please check the facts. The AI might not be accurate. So this is where all the way storytelling, traditional journalism really, really comes out. I think this is where the hardcore journalism thrives, because nobody can do a investigative journalism like a human. I mean, AI wouldn't be able to do that at this point in time, at least. Yeah.
If we look specifically at AEO, answer engine optimization, sometimes GEO, generative engine optimization, I asked Barry if the optimization techniques touted as AEO or GEO solutions are simply SEO under a different name.
Short answer is yes, it's nonsense. The long answer is maybe a bit more complicated. If you are a website that is dependent on traffic, like you need people to visit your website for any sort of monetization, I genuinely believe there is no value exchange in optimizing for LLMs, because LLMs do not send meaningful traffic to the web. They just don't. No matter how many citations they have, no matter how elaborate they cite their sources, people who are on ChatGPT or on Gemini or on Claude almost never click through to a website. So yes, you can maximize your visibility in there, and maybe you can even attach some KPIs to that in terms of brand awareness and brand salience and brand perception and all of that stuff. But if it doesn't actually send traffic to your website, why are you doing that? Why are you putting all that effort in? When you actually look at the tactics and strategies that these GEO suppliers are trying to peddle, it's just SEO. Because everything that LLMs do, and I do mean everything, is founded on the exact same principles as classic search. It's information retrieval. And that's what SEO has been about for the last 25 years. Information retrieval, optimizing for information retrieval. Every single LLM prompt will start with a search happening in the background. So we're still talking about classic SEO, and there isn't really a tactic that the GEO practitioners are putting out there that isn't also an SEO tactic, or even more dangerously, is an SEO tactic that stopped working in SEO 15 years ago and is now considered a spam tactic.
Clara agrees that SEO best practice is still the way to go, but points out that it's important to stay up to date.
For me, it's there's not a lot of difference. I think that the basic things are the same, but obviously there are some factors that are changing a little bit and that now are more important than last year, for example.
She also notes that although there are other answer engines, Google's AI overviews is the one to pay attention to.
AI overviews is the real change because we have LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, but there are only 0.02% of traffic. We don't have traffic from this LLM. We need to work to appear and to be mentioned for these sources, but nowadays we need to work for the traffic and we need to understand where is the traffic now.
Barry notes that ChatGPT has never become the traffic source that people thought it might.
There's a bit of a panic that ChatGPT was going to replace Google, which has never really materialized. In fact, what we saw was the more people use ChatGPT, the more people also use Google. So I find it, again, a bit ironic in that they tend to then use Google to verify what ChatGPT is telling them. In the year that ChatGPT saw the most growth, Google also saw the most growth it's seen in a very long time, like 20% year-on-year growth in search volume on Google, which is insane. Google hasn't seen that since the early 2000s.
Turning back to the zero-click issue more broadly, as part of the research for this report, Woodwing ran a survey to try to get a sense of what its customers knew about zero-click search, what impact it was having on their businesses, and what actions they were planning to take to mitigate any traffic losses. If you want to see the full results of that survey, take a look at the zero-click content shift report. Download it for free from voices.media/zero-click. One of the headline findings of Woodwing's survey was that 92% of respondents were at least somewhat familiar with zero-click. But as John says, being aware of it and doing something about it are two very different things.
Well, I think if you're aware of it, I think you definitely need to act. I think the first call of action is definitely to have a independent party or consultant to come in, right, to do a scan, right, of your technology stack. Tell them what is your business like, what is the segment that you're serving, what are your pains, and these are the technology stack that we have. My wife always said this, before we move house, let's look at the storeroom. What do we have, right? What do we need to throw out? What do we need to replace? What do we need to buy new ones? So this I think is the fundamental.
The perfect tech stack is on every publisher's shopping list. And John says the secret on that front is integration.
The perfect tech stack would be an integrated technology stack, right? So that you don't have sort of a silo system. You have a system that able to bi-directionally or multi-directionally talking to each other. I think that's the perfect one. I mean, it's very, very important to have groupings of tech stack that could communicate with each other and easily flow and integrate. So that's, I think, the secret. Obviously, budget is always a constraint, but we all have to be smart where we put our money in. First of all, before we even talk about budget, let's take the mirror out and look at ourselves, right? Take a look at our own reflection. Do we have the fundamentals? Our team working in symphony, or our team strangling each other, or they are complete strangers where the print and the digital doesn't even talk to each other? So these are things that I think we need to look at as a fundamental. And then from there, then we look at, okay, if I have $10, where I'm going to spend them on, right? And this is where I think it's worthwhile spending a little bit of money on an independent consultant to come in, scan it, right? Looking at the culture, looking at the technology, looking at your business model, and looking at your content. Where is the priority that you should be investing in?
Clara agrees that to prepare for the zero-click future, you need to audit your business, especially the types of content that you're publishing.
We need to analyze which type of content is impacted by AI overviews with different tools, and obviously understand that, for example, the reviews or content that explains how to do something, probably it doesn't work now, no? We have a problem with niche sites. For example, the technology sites have a huge problem because they are losing all the traffic, evergreen traffic, and they need to change the formats and the product. We can change our perspective of the product and the format of the content with opinions about a product, a technology product, for example, a gadget. It doesn't work because everything that you search with opinions is responded by AI overview. So this type of format needs to be disappear from our strategy, but we can work on new format.
In her report on the impact of AI overviews on Spanish media, Clara found certain types of content performed better than others.
This report, something that we saw is that the most affected content was evergreen content. We saw that the trending topics of the day and news for that day performs better and appears in top stories and not in AI overview. So the most affected content is lifestyle, have a huge difference for breaking news because, well, for now, we are seeing that we have an opportunity here, and it's something that can work because it's the core of the journalism, I think. If we work on breaking news for now, at this moment, we can try to catch search traffic. You need to catch the trend of the day with your core products. If, for example, we talk about Eurovision Song Contest, and we are working on the fashion niche, we can use this event to try to catch this trend and, for example, talk about the best dress of the Eurovision Song Contest.
I'm not sure how Barry feels about Eurovision, but I do know he agrees on spotlighting news as a defence against AI disintermediation.
There's a few areas where AI can't really replicate you. That is, for example, in this context like hyperlocal news or breaking news stories. AI can only summarize the news after it's been reported. So that's an area where as a publisher you can really focus on. Other aspects you can focus on is the kind of detailed insight and in-depth analysis that AI struggles with, because AI's output by default is fairly mediocre, run-of-the-mill, because of the nature of how LLMs are trained. They can't really offer anything new. So if you have anything new and insightful to add, that's an area you can focus on.
But the big defence against zero-click lies in delivering content that your audience values.
Too many publishers write too much content just to tick an algorithmic box rather than actually add value. And the publishers that I work with that are not affected by this existential crisis, that are actually seeing stable traffic or even growing traffic, are publishers who've never chased after clicks. Well, local publishers, for example, that just focus on doing the best they can to cover their local areas and provide value to their audience there. They're not seeing any impact from AI. They're stable, they're growing. But the publishers who have been chasing after clicks, who've gone off in all these different directions, like, oh, we're going to do product reviews now, and we're going to write all this lifestyle content because it does well in Google and we get traffic from Discover. And that's now come tumbling down. And I understand why they did that in the first place, and I also understand why it's now stopped working. The only thing Google cares about is to make sure its search results are so good, people never start using another search engine. Google doesn't give a shit about your website. It really doesn't. It cares only about its users, and it will do whatever it can to keep users on Google. And if that means throwing 3/4 of the website into the meat grinder, so be it. As long as Google stays the destination for users who want to find information on the web, so that Google can monetize them. And you need to be aware of that if you want to stay in Google's good graces, you need to make sure you never end up in the meat grinder, but always aim for maximum user satisfaction so that Google has no choice but to show you. That Google is never tempted to downgrade your website because you just are the best at delivering that particular bit of information in the most pleasant format to your users. And ironically, if you do that, if you really focus on that at the expense of everything else, you will find yourself not relying on Google anymore because your readers will go directly to you. They'll subscribe directly to you. They'll install your app. They'll subscribe to your newsletters. And yes, you'll still be visible in Google, but you will not be reliant on it anymore because you will have such a great relationship with your readers, with your audience, that if Google still decides to pull the plug, you might feel a bit of pain, but you'll be fine otherwise because you have those loyal readers, that loyal audience that just will come to you directly. And that's the big irony of it. If you optimize too much for Google, just chasing the algorithm, you end up losing in the long run. Whereas if you optimize for your users, you also end up optimizing for Google, but also in a way that makes you immune to whatever Google is up to. Don't worry about the intermediaries. Don't worry about the channels. Make sure you deliver maximum value for the audience. And don't be afraid to let people know what you're doing. I think too many publishers are maybe a little bit hesitant, a little bit shy, the smaller ones especially, to shout off the rooftops like, hey, we're really good at this, because that would involve a dirty word called marketing. And in the news industry, marketing has always been a very dirty word because it's been associated with a commercialization of content. But marketing is nothing more than to make sure your product matches what your users want and probably exceeds their expectations. That's what classic marketing should be about. Chasing after your users, chasing after your audience, that's marketing. And you need to embrace that internally as well. You need to understand what value you can add to your audience and make sure you deliver that in as broadly and powerfully as you can. But that also means you have to talk to your customers and understand what they want, what their needs are, and how you can match that.
For John, looking back to that 3-pillar model for zero-click success, publishers need to give their audience what AI can't, and that's the human touch.
Storytelling, it has been there since the dawn of human kind, right? So I think, and what storytelling is all about is about the audience. So you need to know the audience, right? And then you need to have the tools to do it. So understanding your tools, understanding your audience, I think that's where you will always survive. I mean, if you go into some of these archaeological finds, you find paintings that is 50,000 years old, right? Because that person is telling a story with the right tool. And I hope we do that with the publishers as well.
For Clara, the human touch rests first and foremost on journalistic values.
I try to evangelize in all the newsroom. We have the opportunity now to put the journalism in the first position, to put the audience in the focus, and recover the opportunity to being an editorial brand, to being a strong brand.
And being a strong brand could mean getting past traditional click-through metrics and focusing on building direct relationships with the audience.
Something that is really difficult is to change the mindset for the publishers that work a lot of years with the click and the unique users. These people are giving us their data and are trying to be more connected with us. Here we have an opportunity. We think in the user needs model, we understand that now publisher and media can create a community and not only creating information or content.
For Barry, people power is a powerful weapon in fighting any referral traffic declines, especially around high engagement formats that go direct to the audience.
You know what those have in common, the newsletters and the podcast specifically, is that they're generally people-led. And again, that's something a lot of publishers are a bit hesitant to. We are now into an era of creator journalism, where the journalists themselves become sort of mini stars in their own right. And a lot of publishers find it very scary because they're afraid those journalists might leave and go somewhere else. I see it as an opportunity. Like, yeah, if you have good, strong journalistic voices in your own organization, promote them, make them creators if they're wanting to do that, but then also make sure they don't ever get tempted to go somewhere else, which means you have to actually pay them a bloody salary and maybe even do like a profit share on the podcast or videos of what they're doing. It's still a people business, you know. We tend to talk about this in the abstract very often, and also because we look at it through the lens of technology. But people like talking to people like listening to people. And if they trust a certain journalist, trust a certain voice, then they will follow that voice and they want to listen to that voice. And if that voice goes from written word to podcast, to videos, then they will go along with it. If you start doing events and put that personality on stage, then you'll sell more tickets, more seats to that event because people will want to see that person speak.
I started this episode of the Publisher Podcast with a quote from Brian Morrissey, calling for the open web to be read its last rites. Well, just in case you think we've been a little bit too optimistic in this episode, speaking before Google's big announcement, Barry shared a similar worry if Google was to go full tilt on AI mode.
If the entire search experience becomes an AI mode first search experience, where Google doesn't bother with blue links anymore, it just shows you a summary with citations and sources, then I think we as the web have a real problem on our hands, because I couldn't even fault Google for doing this, if I'm entirely honest, because the problem the web has, which is a problem partly of the technology giants making and partly of our own making, is that it's become very difficult to use websites. It's a lot of friction to interact with the web, especially websites you haven't visited before. AI mode, every time I've used it, I find myself quite enamored with the ease of use, that it allows me to find the information I'm looking for and get a neat little summary with source links, with attribution, that gives me a lot of trust and confidence that it's the right answer, without actually having to experience any friction of interacting with the web. At the moment, the value exchange for Google is still very clear. You let Google crawl and index your content, and in return, you still get decent traffic. You know, we're still talking, for most websites, search and discover combined will account for at least half of the total traffic, if not more. Search on its own maybe 20-25% of your total traffic. So there's still a lot of potential for Google traffic, and therefore you allow Google access, you let them index your content, that sort of stuff. If AI mode becomes the default experience, that value exchange becomes similar to the value exchange we have with ChatGPT, which means there isn't really a value exchange, in which case there would be sense to block Google from calling your website and indexing your content, unless there is some sort of other monetization opportunity. And I also think that would be an existential threat for Google, because Google relies on the ability to crawl and index these websites to deliver the most accurate, up-to-date information, which is also one of the reasons why I don't think Google will make AI mode the default, because it would fundamentally undermine their own business model in terms of being able to deliver the most accurate, up-to-date search results for their users.
Whatever the zero-click future holds, doomsday or just another disruption, none of us can control how AI search is going to develop. Google is going to Google. What we can do is be smarter about zero-click and take control of our own publishing strategies.
I think the most important thing is that if the publisher have heard of this or seen this or experienced this, they should act on it. Because with the speed of the internet and the world that we're living in today, every minute counts.
And never forget that delivering value to the audience is always the secret of publishing success.
I don't think we're in any real existential threat just yet. It's just gotten a bit harder. We have to be a bit smarter about what we're doing. We have to make better decisions about our health as a website and as a content producer in the short term. And in the short term, those decisions might not lead to more traffic. But in the long term, they help immunize you against Google's whims and fickles, against what the LLMs are up to, against what the next ketamine-fueled daydream is of some Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur. Because the long-term value of your product to your readers is something that will help you survive whatever comes next. And whatever decision you make, it should never undermine that long-term value.
Almost every digital disruption that the publishing industry has faced can be seen as a glass half empty challenge or as a glass half full opportunity. Zero-click search is no exception. Of course, the answer engines pose a threat to discoverability, site traffic and ultimately revenue. However, in acting to counter lost visibility, publishers have the opportunity to build a robust post-Google future. Publishing needs to cure its click addiction, become audience first, and lean into people-led content. Publishers have to diversify everything from their audience acquisition strategies to content distribution and revenue generation. They need to build technology infrastructures agile enough to cope with the uncertainty of AI and integrated enough to support cost-effective omni-channel distribution. Maybe most importantly, publishers need to take on the full-time task of keeping up with the latest developments in AI, both to ward off impending threats, but also to make the most of the opportunities it offers. The bottom line is, relying on traffic referrals from Google or any of the answer engines is not a good long-term bet, and publishers need to take back control of their own destiny. A huge thank you to everyone that helped in the research for this episode, especially Clara, John and Barry, and of course Woodwing, without whose support we would not have been able to write the zero-click content shift report or make this episode. Find out more about Woodwing's publishing solutions at woodwing.com. And remember, you can download the full zero-click content shift report at voices.media/zeroclick.